Okay. Hi there. My name is Shashank, and this is my project. Uh, so, uh, I'm Shashank Sharma, but I also go by the name Sinyasi, and I've been making comics and stories on my Instagram channel for some time now. You can check it out later. Um, but I'm also an engineer, a teacher, a nonviolent communication practitioner, and now a social designer among other things. But primarily I think like to think of myself as a storyteller. So I'm gonna try and tell you a story today. So this particular story started about 10 years ago when I joined Teach for India right out of engineering college as a fellow. And this was me teaching in a low income government classroom in New Delhi for 2 years. And these were the kids I had, 42 8-year olds, and I have some of the best memories from that particular time, but also some tough ones. Um, and so it was quite obvious for me to start looking for a thesis project in which was related to education and equity. And we all suffered from the pandemic, but not all of us have suffered equally. And so, right now, there's a dire situation with regards to educational outcomes, especially among the underprivileged and low social economic communities. So the journey hasn't been simple. I asked myself a bunch of these questions, while trying to get to, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve. And something that we're taught here at DSI is that, before we design something, we should ask who's missing from the table. And and this is kind of what I came back to. And the answer was representation. But I got to that when I began working with my thesis partners, Care to Play. Care to Play is a conglomerate of 5 organizations: Indus Action, Sajha, Trickle Up, ID Insight, and Rocket Learning. And their goal was to address the issues of early childhood access to nutrition and education in the New Delhi region. And my goal was to get closer to development sector organizations in India and understand the issues of equity that they're dealing with. So I signed on as a designer and facilitator. And while conducting the workshop, I looked around and I said, who's missing from the table? And the community was. And when it's India and we're looking for who's missing from the table, the issue that sort of really stands out is the issue of caste. So I began researching about caste, and caste in India is thousands of years old, and the lessons and from it are passed from generation to generation. And caste is essentially a hierarchy of power, like who gets to wield power and who does not. And so let's look at how caste manifests in India. So the current reality is that the Hindu high caste uh, occupies is about 21% of India's population, while the rest is 79%. Um, but the reality is that the Hindu high caste has 41% of India's wealth as compared to the rest. In media, the Hindu high caste represents 88% of all media personnel. But in the prison system in India, the Hindu high caste represents only 7.9% of India's prisoners. So, this makes you ask, like, where's the justice among all this? And by the way, I belong to the Hindu high caste. So where's the justice in all this? But the other thing is, like, is the Hindu high caste just better than everyone else? And Jared Diamond, in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, suggests otherwise. So he suggests that societies develop over time because of environmental factors, because of random factors, because of social factors, and that advantage is then passed on from generation to generation. And so this particular belief, I thought should be there in the development sector already. And in order to verify, I spoke to 2 ex-colleagues from Teach for India who are now leaders in the education sector. And I asked them if that was the case. And turns out that the development sector, or the NGO sector in India, is essentially pro-bias. The best pitches are the ones with the best markers of privilege, like an Ivy League education or equivalent. And so here's what I decided to work on. How might we develop a project that aids intervention designers, leaders in the development sector, and teachers see how privilege develops in systems over time, counter the narratives of privilege already present in the system, and facilitate conversations regarding addressing these inequities? And so this is where my project came to be Perspective, a game of social inequities. But why a game? So games have the potential to engage learners in ways that traditional classroom instruction often fails to do. But also, I've been a gamer all my life. Games like Age of Empires, Sid Meier's Civilization, Dwarf Fortress, RimWorld, Catan have taught me a lot about systems and strategy. And at the same time, during my workshop with Care to Play, I helped them develop this particular system that you can see on the bottom right. Um, uh, this is the ecosystem in which they operate. But there's another reason. So the World Bank in October 2022 uh, adopted the Multidimensional Poverty Index, which moves away from just looking at poverty in monetary terms and now also has health, education, and standard of living uh, in, uh, in order to understand what poverty really looks like. And so how do you simulate this system? And so I went through, just a few simple iterations, just a couple. And then I decided that these were my goals for designing the game. To keep it really simple, to simulate the systems logically, to make it playable offline and online, because a lot of the community I was working with was in India. And facilitation should be safe and constructive. And so this was my final outcome. And this particular game is all about domination, at least initially. So the players begin on an unclaimed game board and gather resources. They slowly capture tiles as they go along using the resources they acquired. And eventually the player who's able to capture the most amount of resources in tiles comes to dominate the board. And then the next stage is consolidate. So it's all about discussing what happened during the game. Questions are raised about what happened, what are the power dynamics in the game, the trajectory of each community as the game progressed, and a lot of such discussions. But the final part is cooperation. How do we get to equity in a system that is so unbalanced? How do we share power? And also, what even is fair in a system like this? So in order to see if the game was actually working, I had over 20 test sessions with multiple play testers, and we asked questions like, who has the most power on this board? Which community now represents the dominant culture? What do you think the repercussions will be of that? And who has the least power on the board? What do you think will happen to that particular community? And I also ended up training ChatGPT with the rules of the game and running multiple simulations in order to verify if the game was working properly. But also the ironic thing here is that ChatGPT itself has been trained on data sets of privilege. So that was a little bit funny. So the feedback that I received was in line with what I was hoping for. Players had a better understanding of privilege, but also at the same time they were frustrated because there were things that they just couldn't do that they would expect to do from a strategy game. And so I feel that really honed in what the idea of privilege is. And again, the more you have, the more you will have, because you can develop resources in order to get there. And so I'm going to conclude with the story, the next Ramanujan. So Ramanujan is one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, and in fact, he's one of the greatest Indian mathematicians, of all time. And I'm going to move to this fact. Statistically, almost 2 Indians for every 7 people in the world, right? But we are not represented in literature or research. So if there is a Ramanujan waiting somewhere in India, they probably won't have the right opportunity to bloom. So my hope is that through interventions that are better designed, inclusive, and driven by an awareness of privilege and power, we can provide a better future for the children out there. We need to unlearn a few things. How do we get the people who aren't at the table on it? It's not possible to do that by the rules of the current system. We need to redefine what is fair. And so I'm going to end with a quote from the author of Nonviolent Communication. Don't just do something, stand there. And thank you. I'd like to thank my family who've been, very supportive through this very erratic journey. My chair, Mia, Kara, who's helped me a lot through this project, the Thesis Advisor Group, my friends back home who are probably watching this, my partners, and of course, DSI. Thank you so much for, all the heavy discussions I got us into. Thank you so much.